I will hand over this session to you. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and you will see immediately this is a chilled-out session, as you would expect from the Bahamas and Antigua, which are two of the most chilled countries on Earth and the most wonderful places to visit. The remarks were made in the opening session about my suntan. It's absolutely no thanks to Antigua that I have a suntan. I was there in March of this year, and they worked me to the bone that I barely saw the sun or sea, but I did have a fantastic welcome and had the pleasure of going to Barbuda, which is one of the great unfound islands on the earth. And of course, the Bahamas needs no introduction. These wonderful islands, fantastic beaches, lovely sea, all of which on both countries are now vulnerable to climate changes, climate differences, and particularly vulnerable to the buzzword at the moment, which is energy security. How do these islands cope with this future where they don't have oil themselves and are responsible and have to respond to energy security? And then, of course, we have now food security with this increasing inflationary prices. Anyway, you don't need to hear from me. You need to hear from them, because we have the two great leaders of their countries and two leaders who have had to cope through a horrendous time of COVID. These countries, as you know, are very dependent upon tourism. So you had 2 years with very little tourism. I was very pleased that I was able to persuade the UK government to lift both these countries off their red list so that tourism could return as quickly as it possibly could to Commonwealth island countries. And Britain, I'm glad to say, did respond very quickly to it. But anyway, enough from me. I'm absolutely delighted to introduce the great leader from Bahamas to say a few words.
Lord Marlin, Your Excellencies, Madam Secretary General, colleagues, friends from around the Commonwealth. The world is currently experiencing a number of what I call once-in-a-generation challenges. The health and economic hangovers of the COVID-19 pandemic linger on, and the war in Ukraine is exacerbating a number of economic challenges: rising inflation, supply chain issues, rising unemployment, rising food costs, coupled with rising food shortages. The list goes on. Amidst all of it, the negative impacts of climate change remain the most fundamental existential threat. But that threat is not evenly spread. Those of us least responsible for the carbon emissions which drive climate change are suffering from the greatest negative impact. For us, it is not simply a threat, but a clear and present danger, a danger which affects our daily reality. Our hurricane season started 22 days ago. This year, the forecast is for more storms and storms of greater intensity. A handful of geological facts highlight our widespread vulnerability. Our archipelago is spread over 100,000 square miles. 95% of the Bahamas consists of the seas and oceans. We are an ocean state. The highest elevation in the country is Mount Alvernia on Cat Island. It rises approximately 206 feet or 64 meters above sea level. 80% of our land lies less than 1.5 meters above sea level. As such, it is vulnerable to floods caused by rises in sea level, along with storm surges due to hurricanes. When the storms come, we have no escape. We do what we can to shelter, but we are at the mercy of the forces far beyond our control. Despite these dangers, we do not wish to live as victims. Like people the world over, we want dignity and an agency in determining our lives and livelihoods. With the right investment in infrastructure and access to much-needed funds and technical support, we can take great steps to ensure our survival. But we cannot do it alone. We need partners to support us in our efforts, and we do not think it is too much to ask those who have contributed so much to climate disaster to step forward and step up in partnering with us to mitigate against its impact. For the Bahamas, financing for the blue economy goes even further. We can build both physical and economic sustainability. At the beginning of these remarks, I mentioned some of the harshest economic conditions facing the world. The Bahamas is experiencing the same headwinds. While we have little economic power to affect global outcome, we are pulling levers in our own domestic economy to minimize the harm to our people. Rather than merely debate the old binary choices of austerity versus growth, we wish to promote the smart choices and opportunities in our blue economy. But again, we cannot do it alone. Yesterday, the Commonwealth Secretariat published its Ocean Action Report, an ocean of opportunity. This provided an update on the progress of the Commonwealth Blue Charter. I congratulate the Secretary General and her team on this excellent initiative and confirm that the Bahamas will continue to give fullest support. In respect of today's discussion, I wish to highlight two striking details in that report. The first is the incredibly low level of Ocean Conservation Fund currently available. Ocean financing is the least well-funded of all sustainable development goals. The Secretariat calculates that up to 2019, ocean conservation received only 0.01% of all development funding. I'll say that again. Ocean conservation received only 0.01% of all development funding. The Secretariat also calculates that support for actions relating to the oceans received less than 2% of funding from the Green Climate Fund and only 0.7% from the Global Environmental Facility. Why is this? There's no obvious answer. Anecdotally, it appears that everyone imagines that much more is being spent, but it's not. Perhaps the neglect has been driven by the thought that someone else is taking care of it. Whatever the reason, it is clear that if the situation is not improved, we will fail in our efforts. And so my charge today is to ask, what can we in this room do to raise awareness of this? What can we do to drive urgent action for increased support? A second striking detail in the report was a list of traditional and innovative financing instruments and mechanisms which can be effectively deployed in the blue economy. These include ocean impact investment and technology funds. This include investors who are looking for both a social as well as an economic return. Then the debt finance, given that approximately half of our country's fiscal debt, and no doubt half of SID's fiscal debt, is due to the costs linked to the damage caused by hurricanes and other manifestations of climate change, we are wary of incurring greater climate-related debt, when prevention measures would be far more effective and efficient. Another measure, bonds and other capital market products. Risk alleviation measures, which include the kinds of initiative around blue carbon that my government has recently enacted through legislation. Financial technology, which employs blockchain technology to conduct better forms of observation, inspection, and transparent data access. Blended ocean financing concepts, which include contributions from, for example, tourist fees. The creation of an ocean sustainable bank to provide a financing mechanism to support ocean action, and supplementary funding from trust and sovereign wealth funds. The list more than demonstrates that we know how to do what needs to be done. But why has it not been done? Is it because we lack the will to do it? We have chosen to gather as friends in a Commonwealth because we see value in the institution. We have other opportunities, other fora in which to meet. But we gather here because the Commonwealth provides something which other organizations, our regional organizations, and the United Nations do not. A gathering of peoples connected by shared traditions and shared values. At a bare minimum, this makes each of us responsible for honoring the conditions of membership. At a time when needs are increasing so dramatically, why have some members withdrawn technical and other support, thereby starving the organization of much needed funding? Friends, if we see the Commonwealth as vital, necessary, and urgent to secure the kind of future we have all committed to, then we have to honor our commitments to empower it to do so. We participate in the Commonwealth because we know we can achieve so much more by working together. And we also know that we cannot do it alone. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. It is about action rather than talk, isn't it? Commonwealth Enterprise and Investment Council, which I have the honour of chairing, work very closely with the government of Antigua and Barbuda, in particular with their High Commissioner in London, who keeps us up to the mark. As I said earlier in the year, I had the great honour of being received by the Prime Minister, Gaston Brown, and I'm delighted that he is with us today to tell us about Antigua. Over to you, Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Lord Maryland. I acknowledge my colleague head, the distinguished Prime Minister of the Bahamas, other distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Well, I believe my function here this afternoon is greater than telling you about Antigua and Barbuda. So I will speak broadly about the issue of sustainable development within SIDS, small island states. As you know, within the Caribbean region, we have a number of SIDS, and these SIDS, along with those in the Pacific and Indian Oceans, have been on the front lines of climate change. But the problem or problems confronting SIDS go beyond the issue of climate change. Most SIDS, small island states, they have several vulnerabilities. In fact, many of them are extremely, or all of them for that matter, extremely vulnerable to exogenous shocks. In fact, the prevailing situation in the Ukraine, in which there has been an escalation in food and fuel prices, would have impacted SIDS more so than any other group of countries globally. It means, therefore, that SIDS require global attention. It requires the support of all, including the Commonwealth of Nations, to support them in the aspiration to provide a sustainable living standard for their people. And today we're here to share with you some of those vulnerabilities and the fact that these SIDS, they lack resilience. In fact, the most critical issue affecting SIDS is the issue of climate change. And we all know that climate change is real. We know that it is the most significant existential threat facing all of humanity. And it is the type of threat that requires an all of humanity response, not just for some of us to address this issue, but for all of us, nations large and small, people rich and poor, to address this very significant threat that, if not addressed within the next decade for sure, could result in the elimination of human civilization. And there are some who may believe that the latter is a hyperbole, but it is real, because when you look at the industrialized countries and their profligacy in the use of fossil fuels, it is obvious that we're unlikely to reach that 1.5 degree threshold, and that there will continue to be an overshoot. As a consequence, we may literally burn the planet into extinction. Now, we all have a common humanity, and we all must be empathetic to each other. And I believe that the impact on small island states, which is disproportionate to others, should be such that SIDS should be given special consideration. From time to time, we have indicated to the international community that SIDS have a number of vulnerabilities. So they're not only vulnerable based on exogenous shocks, to include climate change, but they're not resilient. And the lack of resilience is due to their small size. Many SIDS are microstates with populations under 100,000 people. They have limited capital, limited financial and human resources. So whenever they have to sustain these climate damage or damages, it takes them some time to recover. The United States, which is the wealthiest country on the planet, almost every year, a state within the US gets damaged by a hurricane. But they're able to recover quickly because they have the financial, human, and technological resources in order to recover quickly. We do not. Now, the irony about it is that the consequences of climate change are not as a result of any doing of small states. In fact, we're in the front lines when we have negligible emissions compared to the industrialized countries that continue to pollute our planet. They continue to pursue a policy of profits over human civilization, over the sustainability of human civilization. They continue to build economies based on dirty money. And when I speak about dirty money, oil money is dirty, literally and figuratively. That is the reality of it. In fact, its impact is far greater than even illicit receipts from narcotics. But yet, it is not given the type of attention that it deserves. And many large states continue to game the system. They speak about the issue of climate change and meeting certain commitments, but whenever we have the various conferences of the party, they fail to satisfy the commitments. And we all know about this famous $100 billion that they would have pledged many years ago. And we are still yet to achieve that obligation. And the reality is $100 billion is a small amount of money. But yet still, we're not seeing that level of commitment. Instead, they continue to subsidize fossil fuels to the tune of trillions of dollars. And whereas we're trying to build, at least in principle, a green global economy, the monies that are needed in order to advance the technology and to drive down costs, they're not making the necessary resources available. So there is clearly a lack of international commitment, and it requires perhaps a bottom-up approach for even electors to place pressure on their political leaders to advance the global climate agenda. And again, going back to the impact on small states, from time to time we have indicated to the international community that based on our size, our limited resources, the fact too that many small states have a very large debt overhang because they've had to borrow repeatedly in order to respond to climate damage, that we just do not have the type of resources in order to mitigate and even to adapt to the effects of climate change. But for many, it appears as though small states are coming cap in hand with a begging bowl. And the reality is, it is their profligate use of fossil fuels that are literally, or is literally undermining our development. That is the stark reality. In fact, we believe that those polluters, they have a legal responsibility to pay. The polluter must pay. So whenever we bring to the attention of the industrialized world that we need financing in order to adapt and to mitigate the effects of climate change, they should not see it as small states coming cap in hand. In fact, they have a moral obligation. At the end of the day, we're all part of a human civilization. 200,000 years ago, we all had a common grandmother. We all have a common mitochondrial DNA. We are fundamentally one and the same. We live on the same planet. So why should some in, let's say, certain geographical locales should be able to live comfortably while others in other areas that their development should be undermined? There has to be some equity in the system, and that is why we continue to fight for climate justice. And we certainly want to thank the Commonwealth Business Forum and certainly the Commonwealth Secretariat, Lord Malin, and those who have put this forum together for their assistance in helping us with our advocacy. Because, you know, it's small states today, but the reality is, if our civilization is wiped out, let's say within the Caribbean Seas as an example, then evidently the large countries would end up with climate refugees, and they will be next. So there has to be some concerted effort to work together, to start with the most vulnerable, to assist them in developing some level of climate resilience so that you know, they can sustain these climate events, and at the same time that they can recover quicker. In fact, I'll go further. I believe that outside of the funding to acquire the necessary technologies in order to transition into green energy applications, that more funding should be made available in technologies to remove carbon from the Earth's atmosphere. That is where the funds should be going instead of all of the fossil fuel subsidies that these countries continue to support. Because ultimately, we want to have a clean, green world, not a global economy that is based on dirty money that is literally imperiling human civilization. So, in the case of Antigua and Barbuda, we are literally suffering from all of the consequences of climate change. And that is no exaggeration. So, for example, we have had very frequent and powerful storms. The last one was in 2017, in which our sister island, Barbuda, was practically, well, totally decimated. In fact, 95% of the properties were damaged. Prior to that, we would have had Hurricane Louis, in which we would have lost about nearly $100 million in GDP. Within Dominica, they would have suffered the consequences of 2 successive hurricanes that would have wiped out about 200+% of the GDP. Just imagine these developed countries. If the United Kingdom, the United States, for example, were to lose 200% of the GDP, how would they feel? So we need to see some more empathy and more action, not talk. And I hope that our engagement here today will bring greater reality to the pressing need for support for SIDS, and that at the end of the day, it should not only be a moral, but a legal obligation for developed countries, especially industrialized countries, to pay. We're not begging you. You're creating the conditions for these damages. So in Antigua and Barbuda, we've had all these hurricanes, have had to borrow repeatedly in order to repair damaged infrastructure or economy, damaged homes, buildings. And we have had droughts as well. In fact, last year was the lowest recorded level of rainfall in the history of our country. Less than 18 inches of rain in an entire year. As a consequence, we had to move quickly to purchase reverse osmosis plants. And we had to do so at a cost of $130 million. So monies that should have gone towards the development of our people, we had to utilize those funds to purchase reverse osmosis plants. Then you have the impact on crops and animals, absolutely devastating impact. We have seen ocean acidification. We have had coastal erosion. Even one of our finest beaches, Dickinson Bay, was eroded as a result of climate change. You see, when the glaciers melt and you have an increase in you have sea level rise, then obviously these small states, they lose part of their shoreline. So the consequences are real. We have suffered from heat waves. You name the climate event, bushfires, they are happening in Antigua and Barbuda and other small states, and through no fault of ours. Then we have to contend with the other global shocks. More recently, we have had the shocks created from COVID. Again, we had to divert resources for development to deal with a response to COVID. And as I said before, the structural problems associated with these small states are such that they just do not have the resources to transition quickly. So if we don't have the resources through no fault of ours, who should pay? The polluters. And if there's one message I want to leave with you today, is that small states require your advocacy, require your support. And those of you who are here representing developed countries, we need your funding, and you ought to provide adequate funding. And we take umbrage to all sorts of isms and schisms being utilized in order to exclude certain states. One of the vexing issues is the utilization of the per capita income to deprive very vulnerable small states from getting the necessary funding in order to build resilience within their respective societies. There's just something fundamentally wrong about that. In fact, when it comes to climate, there should be absolutely no conditionality. It should be based on need, recognizing that we are suffering disproportionately from the impact of climate change, and that climate change is due primarily to the burning of fossil fuels by industrialized countries. So share your profits. In fact, when you look at the recent profits that have been generated by these oil companies, I'm of the view that there's a need now for a global windfall tax and make those funds available to climate transition within developing countries generally, to include small states. So rather than speaking about a global minimum tax, why not a global windfall tax on these profits that these oil-based companies would have made during the last year or so? Their profits in many instances would have quadrupled. So they must pay a windfall tax because they are doing untold damage to our planet. And if you don't make it difficult for them to operate and to turn sustainable profits and to utilize the funding in order to transition into green energy, then they will never stop. Then you find too that those powerful countries that export a significant amount of oil, they will continue to game the system. They will give lip service to transitioning into green energy applications, but at the same time, they will not make the necessary resources available so to do. So I think that we have now reached an inflection point, and I'm hoping that we can have some global response starting at the grassroots level to hold all countries and certainly their leaders responsible, and that we can move forward with an all-of-society approach to address the significant threat, easily the most significant threat facing our humanity, and that is climate change. I thank you.
Well, it says on my notes here that I should have a fireside chat with these two. If anything, any word was less appropriate from two of the hottest countries in the world than having a fireside chat, I don't know what is, but let's have a chat. You've both talked incredibly brilliantly about the issues facing them. Prime Minister Davis, can I just start with you, and what practical steps have you been able to achieve given the fiscal problems that you've faced in terms, as you've both referred to, in terms of having no tourism, income, all the issues around COVID? What practical steps can you make now within your own financial sphere to green and blue the economy?
Yeah. Well, as I would have mentioned, what we could do would hardly have any impact on the global outcome. What our impact on the global income perhaps will come from our voice continuing to be as loud as it is. But we are pulling some domestic levers to ease the burden of our people. For example, we are investing more in in green energy. We have shift, for example, the government vehicles are moving to electric vehicles. We are now we engage in putting up more solar energy. We're exploring LNG, even though that is not the end all. I think that's a stopgap measure. It's cleaner than what we're using now. And we are aggressively pursuing those avenues domestically. Globally, we think that we are continuing to sensitize the high emitters, that when the greenhouse gas they emit in their countries don't stay in their country. And they have a responsibility for what they're doing. And they need to, as my brother Prime Minister is saying, they have to pay for it. And as we are moving towards setting up a carbon exchange for the purposes of monetizing our blue carbon, we are aggressively working on it. We've just entered into an arrangement with a management company. We are looking to setting up a platform for the purposes of, as I've said, monetizing that to help with with revenues to meet some of the other needs that our country require. If there's one other aspect to this that was touched on by my colleague, and that is the criteria to access funds, and that disenable countries like mine and his from accessing grant funds because they use the per capita criteria. We have been advocating, and I have been advocating since 2015 at the Samoa pathway. Another test for that threshold, that is the vulnerabilities of the various countries, particularly SIDS. Let us use the multi-vulnerability index as opposed to the capital index. That is a fairer approach. Yeah. And that is, we'll ask others to join our voice in that.
Absolutely right. It's these funds have been set up, and as Prime Minister Brown said, they're sitting on piles of money and not distributing them, and in particular to the smaller island states, because they'd rather do big projects than the smaller projects, and that is something we should work on. Picking up on that, Prime Minister Brown, obviously we're aware of the work that your island is doing on the blue economy. Perhaps you wouldn't mind just telling the audience a little bit about that, sure. as well as the practical things that you're doing, which I've witnessed as an island.
Thank you very much. For small island states, I'd say that the blue economy is very important. Most small island states, they are large ocean states. So we have very large sovereign economic zones. And it means, therefore, that there are resources to be exploited, but we obviously lack the type of technology in order to sustainably exploit those resources. But generally speaking, I believe that the blue and green economies, that they are absolutely critical to small island states, that those two sectors should be developed rapidly in order to assist small island states to achieve the necessary economic diversification so that they can achieve climate resilience and certainly sustainability. In the case of the blue economy, we have actually established at our university in Five Islands, University of the West Indies Five Islands campus, we have established a center for oceanography to assist us along with other universities within the Association of Commonwealth Universities to do prime research and to identify the type of products that we can harvest on a sustainable basis, including minerals. fact, one of the areas that we are looking at currently is the issue of sand mining to see whether or not we can do so on a sustainable basis, because the preliminary research would have shown that we have a significant amount of sand banks with sand resources that we can exploit without undermining the marine environment. And you know, we are working with various technocrats globally, and I think that is one of the areas in which the international community could assist in helping us with to develop the necessary expertise so that we can identify sustainable ways in which we can harvest resources from the blue economy to help us to diversify our economies, obviously to increase our revenue yields, and at the same time to utilize those resources to accelerate our transition into renewables, because obviously we all need to build economies based on renewables to generate more jobs, more economic opportunities using renewables, and to move away from the fossil fuel industry. But then again, it also comes right back to the issue of funding. And I think that is one of the areas in which developed countries can help small states to achieve sustainability by helping them to develop the capacity to sustainably harvest those resources. And it includes the technology. In fact, some of it too includes some novel technology. I'm told, for example, that there's technology in which you could sink sargassum, as an example, which has been a nuisance for most Caribbean economies. As you know, we are tourism-based economies, and on an annual basis, we have millions of tons of sargassums literally polluting our beaches. And if we can get the type of technology in which we can sink the sargassum to the bottom of the sea to the extent that we take the carbon out of the Earth's atmosphere, then obviously that will be beneficial to all. So I spoke earlier about the issue of helping us to develop or even have access to technologies to remove carbon, because we all know, based on the slow pace of reducing emissions, we cannot rely exclusively on the large countries reducing the emissions. As I said before, they game in the system. So if we can also have technologies that can remove carbon, that will help us to get to net zero probably by 2045, 2050. But in the case of Antigua and Barbuda, we are certainly investing our limited resources, transitioning into renewables, include wind, solar, and also building a very modest green energy economy, generating new jobs within that sector. But again, it comes back to the issue of funding, as I said, based on the structure of our economies, the limited resources, the high debt overhang as a result of consistent borrowings to repair infrastructure that has been repeatedly damaged by hurricanes. We just do not have the type of financial resources in order to accelerate that transition and even to achieve our NDCs. I mean, in the case of Antigua and Barbuda, we are seeking to reduce our emissions by about 50% by 2030, and hopefully by 2040 we'll become carbon neutral. So again, limited resources, but we are playing our part, diverting resources that potentially should have gone towards achieving some of the SDGs or to enhance them towards our green energy obligations. So we're not only calling upon the developed countries to play their role and industrialized countries to play their part, but we are also playing our part utilizing our very limited resources.
Brilliant. I can see our civil servants are getting very anxious about the time, because I know how busy you are and you've got to get off to greater and better things. It's been fantastic having you both. Thank you very much indeed. You are not coming to the Commonwealth Games, either performing at it or attending, because you've got COP caravan coming to Bahamas. Very briefly, because we're getting into a lot of trouble with our civil servants, who actually run the country rather than, you know what I mean. What do you think for COP?
Yes, we've been invited by the UNSCCF to host the regional pre-COP27 meeting for our region to set out the initiatives and the outcomes that we'd wish to achieve from COP27. So we have agreed to host that in the middle of August. And so I'll be getting around to getting ready for that. So I'll miss you.
Yeah, well, we'll definitely miss you. And Prime Minister Brown, your not coming to the Games, but will doubtless be attending the same COP.
Well, I may surprise you, I may show up.
Well, look,
Not to compete.
the thing I take away from having been to both countries is the incredible resilience of the people. And both of you remarked on the hurricanes and the natural damage that comes along in the most horrendously and virile way it attacks your islands. And as you both have been so clear and haven't pulled any punches, if I may say so, which is so refreshing to hear from political leaders about the problems you're facing, and we stand ready to support you at every angle. And it remains for me to thank you on behalf of the audience for sparing the time and telling us as it is. Thank you very much, both of you.
Pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much to both our heads of government for very insightful remarks and the moderation from Lord Marland. As they leave, I would like to ask the technical team to prepare the video. This video is from Elizabeth Mrema, the Executive Secretary at the UN Convention of Biological Diversity. It's a 5-minute video before we go to the last session of today. And I'd kindly like to ask everyone to stay seated. Yes, let's wait for the last session. But please, over to you, technical team, for the video from Elizabeth Mrema.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank the government of Rwanda and the Commonwealth Enterprise and Investment Council for the kind invitation for me to address this dignified session. It is estimated that islands are home to almost 800 million people, just over 1/10 of the world's population. Islanders have developed a unique culture and derive much of their economic, environmental, and cultural well-being directly or indirectly from the rich natural resources in their immediate environment. Island ecosystems, from mountain forests to wetlands and beyond, provide food, fresh water, wood, fiber, medicines, fuel, tools, and other important raw materials to support livelihood, economies, and cultures. They also provide critical support against natural disasters, and they contribute to the regulation of climate and diseases. Islands simply cannot afford to lose this critical development asset. The interconnected climate and biodiversity crises touch all our lives, yet we are knowingly, through our human actions, destroying the life support systems of this planet. We cannot have a healthy planet without a healthy ocean or thriving biodiversity and balanced ecosystem. Islanders already know that. That is why financing blue-green growth is so critical. We need to enable the necessary financial flows into sustainable coastal and offshore projects so as to turn the tide on the destruction of life in the ocean. We need to give our children and grandchildren the chance to have environmental security. Bankers, insurers, and investors are increasingly conscious that their financial activities impact on the health of the ocean and balanced ecosystems. Delighted, there is a growing attention from the financial sector in making the transition to sustainable financing and investments in greener and innovative business models supported by science-based marine spatial plans. In a few months, the Convention on Biological Diversity will adopt the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, providing for strong biodiversity action in the coming decades, with effective biodiversity mainstreaming into economic policies and sectors, and the effective mobilization of resources being among the key components. The stakes are high and will require a joint effort from parties, stakeholders, and society at large to be successful. I am convinced that business and financial sectors are invested in supporting our efforts and willing to take the necessary action to reverse the current trend on biodiversity loss. Consequently, islands offer a unique, feasible laboratory for an inclusive and secular economy. I am optimistic that through collaboration, ambition, and concrete actions, we will be successful in reverting the loss of nature and safeguarding a healthy and prosperous future for all. Before concluding my remarks today, I would like to once again congratulate the Commonwealth Enterprise and Investment Council for this initiative to promote discussion and for supporting a recovery that is green and sustainable for all, and in so doing, not leaving anyone behind. Our future depends on positive, ambitious, and strong collaboration, and the financial sector has a critical role to play in ensuring that we are successful in our transition to a more sustainable pathway. Thank you very much.
And whether this is your first time to visit Rwanda or you're a frequent flyer, we cannot wait to show you the amazing, exciting things our capital city has to offer throughout the entire Chogam week. Now let's start right here. In the heart of the city, from the 20th of June all the way through to the 25th of June, you can check out the Kigali Street Festival right here at the Imbuga City Walk, where you can discover our amazing Made in Rwanda artisans, some street food, and so much more. And even at night, Kigali is buzzing. We just love to have a great time, and you can see it for yourself. at the Kigali People's Festival here in the car-free zone of Kisimenti and the Nyamirambo car-free zone. And we've got some amazing food.
Thank you very much for your patience, ladies and gentlemen. I know it's not easy. It's the last leg of this run of today. And today's activities, today's panels. The next panel, again, still under the theme of today for this particular session on financing for blue-green growth for sustainable islands. I would like to invite, I believe we are done. Yes, I would like to invite first and foremost the moderator for this session, who is JP Fabry, the director of SEED International, who will then take over inviting the guests and moderating the guests for this panel. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. I know it's the last session, so I'm conscious of this, and in fact, I'll jump right away to introducing the panel. So there's Mansour Hamouyan, who's the founder of BB Box from the UK. Can you? John Bowers, who's the director of new business from MDA Technologies in Canada. Dr. Nick Hardman-Mountford, head of Oceans and Natural Resources, the Commonwealth Secretariat, and Colin Buckley, Managing Director and Global Counsel, British International Investment. So I think we just witnessed, I would say, two powerful speeches that also can set the scene for this discussion, right? And from what the Prime Ministers said, I think the concept of the blue economy hinges very much as well on the theme of CHOGM that we are discussing, right? So it's about delivery, it's about commonality, it's about the future, but it's also about innovation, transformation, and connecting. And I think the blue economy also hits, the blue economy and SIDS embody what the Commonwealth Secretariat has been discussing for long, and that is vulnerability and resilience, right? So we know that the blue economy has a lot of potential on a global scale. So the latest statistics show that by 2030, the blue economy can actually contribute to 3 trillion of economic growth. We also know that the multiplier effect of an investment in the blue economy is 5. So for every dollar that is invested in the blue economy, $5 are created in economic value added. But we also know that the blue economy is extremely broad, diverse, from energy, aquaculture, biotechnology, maritime surveillance, and all the ancillary services, including tourism as well. And for SIDS, this is a very important point because SIDS cover 30% of ocean territory. So we have all these challenges embodied in one discussion. So, but we also have innovative examples of what SIDS are doing, right? So Seychelles had issued the first blue bond. Palau have a maritime sanctuary and a shark sanctuary whereby 80% of their EEZ is earmarked for fisheries, not for fisheries, but for fish tourism. And Belize have also a maritime debt conversion for maritime conservation. So I would like to start off with the potential of the blue economy for small states, right? And I think that over here we need a good discussion, and I think Colin is well set to sort of link this potential from an economic perspective and linking the blue economy to economic growth?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, we've heard two impassioned pleas from the prime ministers that began this, and both of them allude to the particular challenges that SIDS have. I mean, SIDS face a challenge on their inputs, on scale, and on exports. Imports are expensive, inputs are expensive because most of them are imported. Scale is difficult to have because their economies are small and it's difficult to regionalize. Exports are difficult because you have to travel a long distance. I mean, what is unique about the blue-green economy, and I love that concept, by the way, it's not just the blue economy, but the blue-green economy, is it gives an opportunity to SIDS to address each one of those in turn, weakness into strength. So on the inputs, rather than importing energy now, we've got, access to solar, access to other forms of renewable energy that reduce that cost. The sense of scale is a great one because rather than being limited by the land, which has traditionally limited their scale, now you've got the entire ocean, and so suddenly scale has been turned on its head. And even the export problem, the blue-green economy with the notion of perhaps climate finance, climate credits, climate adaptation, these are all benefits that actually don't even have to leave the country. So, I mean, as far as a scene setter, we're in a time where there is reason for guarded optimism. I mean, the blue-green economy, I think, genuinely gives an opportunity for SIDS to kind of readjust how they address their private sector development.
Yes, and in fact, I'd like to jump on the last point that you mentioned, the importance of the private sector. And we know that over there, SIDS also face, as you said, a number of challenges, but we're seeing a lot of startups coming into the scene whereby they're innovating and even in the sense of accessing resources through elements like tokenization, crowdfunding, and also adapting business models to fit in the realities of SIDS. And I'd like to include over here Mansour, who before the session we were talking about his business on how he's adapting it to see how it can fit SIDS. Maybe you want to share your experience and your thoughts around this.
No, absolutely. Just to give you a little bit of background, our main business is in Africa. We provide solar home systems and mini-grids and clean cooking solutions. And these are solutions where we install solar panel batteries at the household of people, and people use mobile money, digital payments. When they pay, the system turns on. When they don't pay, it turns off. And the really exciting things about islands are that we're able to actually maybe reach that level of scale very rapidly in places across the Pacific nations. In places like Rwanda, we've already managed to reach 10% of households with clean electricity. And one of the challenges is scale. How do we actually make sure that the size of market is large enough to be able to justify investments that we've been able to do in Africa in places like small island nations? That is a key question to solve to make it economically viable. The second big thing here as well is that some of these island nations are effectively a set of mini-grids. So there are small grids that are operating, largely run by a centralized diesel generator, so they are consuming quite a lot of diesel. So to be able to actually transition that source of diesel to something more renewable, something more efficient, is totally possible to do as well. The third big element here as well is around productive uses of electricity. So one of the things is that is often overlooked when thinking about the energy transition is not just about providing the clean electron or a clean molecule for energy consumption, but it's also making sure that that consumption happens in a productive way. So a lot of this actually requires appliance financing, machinery financing, so that actually the right machinery, the right appliances can actually be financed for people to actually build economic activity around that. And in all those categories, I think small island nations have an enormous potential to actually be among the first countries in the world to actually transition fully. And while transitioning fully, develop a new economy. That new economy actually helps them to become more sustainable over the long term as well. But the two challenges to solve here to accelerate this is the size of market challenge. How do private investors make those investments in countries where the size of market is small? We're talking tens of thousands of households, or maybe even up to 100,000 households. And the second big challenge here as well is that how do we actually make a project that has the overall return that is meaningful as well? So it's not just about the profitability of that market, but the overall return to be actually meaningful versus the other opportunity that exists. And there needs to be mechanisms to align that front, but the opportunity is huge.
Yes, I think you also managed again to touch on the main challenges that small islands face, right? It's market size, scalability, and all of that. But one route, and you also mentioned it, is the role of digital transformation in ensuring that small islands can either leapfrog development or today, with the confluence of all different technologies, actually be utilized either for a POC or a beta sort of concept to see if that can work, and then companies scale up in other larger markets. I'll turn to John, who can share maybe the power of digital transformation in supporting islands to sort of reduce the barriers surrounding their challenges, their inherent challenges, especially considering when we're talking about maritime resources, the scale that the maritime area has in relation to land area, and the limited resources they have to actually surveil such territories, which can limit and then the actual potential of the blue economy to kick off.
Thank you for that. So one of the ways to think about the financial blue economy is to think about how you underpin the development of that blue economy. I work for a company in Canada called MDA, and thanks to investment from the Canadian government, we've developed sophisticated maritime surveillance capabilities. Seeing is believing. If you can see what is happening on the ocean and you understand what is happening in your surroundings, then that can help you harness the capabilities of the ocean. But that is a huge challenge for small island states. In some cases, the exclusive economic zone for the ocean may extend up to 250 miles. How does a small island state understand what's happening on the ocean so that they can manage fisheries, so that they can manage pollution, so that they can take advantage of other resources in the ocean? It's a challenge. There's many vessels on the ocean today. At any one point in time, there might be 100,000 plus vessels on the ocean. How do I know those vessels are behaving? In some cases, technology can help the island state monitor that domain and take control of that domain, whether it's the Department of Fisheries or the Coast Guard or for academic research. And by understanding what is happening in the domain, then you can better informed with insight to manage the financial development.
Yes, thanks, John. And I think one crucial element, right, of the blue economy is the sustainable use of blue resources, ocean resources. So here we're seeing different interests coming into play. We're seeing the private sector that has many a times a profit motive, so is more exploitative. We have the government that wants to find a balance to diversify its economy, give the incentives for the private sector to come in. But then we also know that the ocean, the resources, are a common heritage of mankind, right? So in all of this, there's a very fine line. And I think here the importance of governance institutions, institutional mechanisms come in play, especially when we're talking of the tragedy of the commons and all of that. So Nick, how do you see the governance element coming into the blue economy, and also how can the Commonwealth really pioneer and be a flag bearer for governance initiatives surrounding the blue economy?
Yeah,
Thank you very much, JP. And yeah, the Commonwealth, I mean, we have 47 of our 54 states have a coastline. We've got 36% of the coastal ocean under national jurisdiction globally is within the Commonwealth. So we are a blue Commonwealth. But the small island developing states, you know, have a particular significance because they have more ocean than land, significantly so. So you know, their economy is predominantly a blue economy. That's sort of 20 times on average more ocean than land, but actually, you know, for some of them, like Kiribati, 4,000 times more ocean than land. Seychelles and Maldives, 3,000 times more ocean than land. That's a huge amount of resource. And you referred to the value of the blue economy being 1.5 trillion a year and set to double by 2030. But that's just the flows. When we look at the asset values, that's about 24 trillion. And so what governments are starting to realize and we need to move towards is that developing a sustainable blue economy is not developing a sector, it's developing a process, a transitional process to move from business as usual to something that is going to build these assets and have accruing assets into the future that are going to continue to provide for those island communities. Those business models that generate revenues now while also building ocean wealth for the future are critical. To do that, governments need a holistic approach, a whole-of-government approach to managing the ocean. Do you have a sustainable blue economy strategy? Does it align with your national ocean policy? Do you have a national coordination mechanism for that? Do you have a marine spatial plan to balance activities on the ocean? All these sort of questions are critical to how governments can manage a blue economy. And so the Commonwealth Blue Charter was a commitment by all Commonwealth governments in 2018 to work on a range of ocean issues, all which relate to this blue economy. And actually, Prime Minister Brown, together with the President of Kenya, are co-champions of a sustainable blue economy action group under the Commonwealth Blue Charter, where countries are coming together to talk about these issues, share best practices, and work together on addressing the shared challenges. And this is really important as well, because the ocean is a shared resource. We say shared ocean, shared values equals shared action in the Commonwealth.
Perfect, thanks, Nick. And I think I'd like to open a bit the discussion and start, concluding and converging everything. And if we had to take the first word from the theme of CHOGM, it's about delivery. So after hearing these different viewpoints, what is your opinion that needs to be done to start delivering the way forward to actually reach a sustainable blue but also green economy for SIDS? And maybe we can start from the far end and start moving and
that
closing.
Conveniently starts with me. I think, look, I think the issue is that we need to find, and I'm going to speak just to the issue of private sector development and economic growth that's fueled by that development. And I think we need to begin to identify businesses that aren't simply insulated from the challenges of SIDS, which are tourism, financial services, things like that. We need to identify lines of business that are particularly profitable because they're in SIDS. And that is the promise of the blue economy. I think there is this question about the use of technology. I mean, technology permits you to be highly productive in, frankly, an isolated position. But the promise of the blue economy is that you can do something that no one else can do, that islands are in a place to deliver on something that a land-based economy can't do. And to do that, frankly, I think we need to better monetize public good. I think the only way that that is really going to commercially work out is by having a better, carbon credit system. And if you have a better carbon credit system, then things like adaptation, mangrove swamps, you know, recalcification, carbon capture, all of these begin to make commercial sense. But I think that's I would say that's the critical first step.
Thanks. So it's all about letting the markets work.
I think it's getting the market to be efficient, because at the moment the market is inefficient because it excludes the public good value.
Perfect. Thanks. Nick?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a really important point, and the value of these nature-based solutions. But they go more beyond than just providing carbon credits for sequestration of carbon. That's a very important part of what a sustainable blue economy can provide. But actually, both governments and finance and private sector need to really look at what the ocean risks are. Because as Prime Minister Brown sort of shared, you know, these ocean risks are affecting all of us. And ocean change is climate change, and ocean action is climate action. So addressing them is critical. I mean, if we look at the amount paid out by insurers over the past 10 years for coastal damage, it was $300 billion. That is a phenomenal amount. And yet, mangrove forests can produce a value of £80 billion per year in avoided losses globally. So you already see per year, that's like, why are we not conserving these things more? Plus they protect 18 million people. You know, coral reefs can provide another 4 billion offset there. So you know, these resources are providing more than just carbon sequestration potential, which is why we've got to recognize them as assets in an ocean accounting framework and start to really look at their value over the long term on the country's balance books. It's really important. And if we look at, so the good news is the financial sector, the insurance sector are really starting to look at this. So if we look at the Mesoamerican reef, which goes sort of along the coast of Belize, which is a Commonwealth country, but also Honduras, Mexico, Guatemala. It's the second largest barrier reef in the world. It has a sort of a service value, if you like, to the economy of about $4.5 billion a year. And yet, you know, it gets destroyed by hurricane damage that reduces the tourism value and all these other issues. And so the Mesoamerican Reef Fund got together with the insurance sector to design a parametric reef insurance product that would pay out in the event of storm damage. And that has been in operation for over 4 test sites up to now. And for this hurricane season, which is going to start in the not too distant future, they're hoping to have 7 sites insured already for that. There's also products being designed to address things like illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing, which cost us $20 billion a year in sort of lost income. So, you know, addressing ocean risk within a financial sense de-risks business, allows us to invest in a sustainable blue economy and to tackle these climate and ocean challenges.
Thanks. And I think you're compounding as well the element of making markets more efficient, right? John, your thoughts on the way forward for a sustainable blue and green economy?
Sure, thank you. I'd like to pick up on, Nick mentioned risks and assets, and technology can provide incredible capability rapidly, which can be harnessed, but not for the sake of technology. Technology is useful if you have a means in mind. Technology is the means to an end. So in the case of the blue economy, when we think about the risks that small island states face, there may be illegal fishing, there may be oil pollution happening in the area. And it turns out that space-based radar is very capable at detecting vessels in the ocean, very capable at detecting oil pollution on water. And so as we start to think about managing the blue economy, as we start to think about the risks that exist, technology can play a significant role in helping to manage and monitor those risks. We have been monitoring the ocean for over 30 years, MDA, with our technology, and we see evidence time and again of vessels that encroach on other territories, EEZs, and are fishing where they should not be fishing. And so maybe that's a risk that a small island state is concerned about, especially from an economic perspective. Technology can help with that. Technology can help with other things, and it becomes part of the foundational infrastructure as we build upon the blue economy.
Thanks, John. So it's about efficiency, it's about transformation. Mansoor, from your end?
I think where I think there's a lot of value in terms of the Commonwealth structure as well. I think there's a lot to learn from Africa that can be actually applied in small island nations as well. So one thing is around electrification itself, where we talked about that, whether it's sort of mini grids or solar home systems, to actually really make sure that there's renewable energy that exists. But the other big part is deforestation, right? And aspects of clean cooking. And I know for a fact that that is a huge challenge in small island nations. And I think what's happened in Africa, there's a real cross-learning that can actually be applied on that as well. I think maybe one thing that we're forgetting as well is that Africa is a very large island with a huge coastline and loads of communities, loads of countries being very, very dependent on the sea to be able to actually generate their income as well. And when we look at the link between energy and economy, it's very clear. We have customers in places like Senegal, in Togo, for cold storage or fishing. To be able to actually be able to have export-grade products. That's just not possible unless you don't store it properly. Those are sort of economic activities that are suddenly possible. So that link between, okay, you can have the electricity, you can protect your forest, but if you don't investing in the right machinery, in the right appliances, creating the right stuff to be able to package, process, or do whatever you need to do inland, it's going to not generate the dollars inwards, typically speaking. And I think that's maybe the cross-learning, that maybe there should be an increased collaboration between the best practices that have been learned, and vice versa too, I'm sure.
Perfect. And I think if we had to sum everything up, the blue economy and the green economy is like any other economic sector, right? It's all about finding that ecosystem approach, making sure that you have the private sector on board, you have the right governance mechanisms, you have a government that has a vision, but then has also the ability to access and leverage financing to be able to apply and implement this vision. And I think if we keep in mind the potential that ocean resources have, not only from a flow, but also from a stock point of view, and the ability of using new financing mechanisms, blockchain-related, crypto-related, NFT tokenization of such assets, I think small states can actually start leveraging much more on these assets and start building a sustainable economic model around them. And I think with those thoughts, I'd like to thank everyone on the panel for joining us for this interesting discussion. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to take comments from the floor, but I'd like to thank you all for participation, and I hope you can enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Another round of applause to our guests. And Mr. Fabry, thank you for keeping it short. I would like to just mention a few announcements. Everyone who was part of today's session, there's a gala dinner at Serena Hotel. If you could make your way there, it kicks off at 7:30, so by 7, it would be great if you're all there. Tomorrow in this hall, we're going to have exciting sessions, everything from Invest in Rwanda, future cities, and sustainable urbanization and the like. So please try and be here as early as possible. Tomorrow is going to be a bit hectic. Lots of heads of government will be here. That said, wishing you a great evening at the Serena Hotel, and thank you all for being patient and staying for the last session. It's been an honor emceeing for you today. Thank you. Have a good evening. Thank you.